Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned, with over 6,000 fighter profiles for you to browse through and get as many direct links as possible to those fighters. The MMA Archive is your one-stop shop to get all your studying done, whether you're predicting, breaking down fights, or just want to see what a fighter is all about. We have everything you need on one page there, so take advantage of the 7-day free trial. Link for that in the description below, and find out why we have over 120 subscribers taking advantage of this service. All right. This week, we're talking about UFC Qatar, which is headlined by a lightweight matchup between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. And then in the co-main event, we have a high-stakes welterweight matchup between former champion Belal Muhammad and Ian Machado Garry. A highlight reel win for either guy could potentially set them up for a title fight, although maybe Belal probably wouldn't fight Makhachev, so maybe it's more so on Garry to try to get the win there and snatch the momentum that Carlos Prates and Michael Morales set up for themselves this past weekend at UFC 322. Now, a few quick notes before we get into the breakdowns here. Firstly, I will be flying out of town Tuesday until Saturday morning, so I'm going to be off the grid pretty much this entire week. So there won't be any extra segments for UFC Qatar. I'll only be doing this full card breakdown here for you guys. And then we have Cage Warriors. We have two Cage Warriors events. And we have LFA 223 going down on the weekend. And I'll do a quick picks type of breakdown for you guys on Thursday or Friday, one of those 2 days for those cards. That's the only other content I'll be dropping this week for YouTube. And then I'll have quick picks written down on the MMALOTN Patreon page for the OKTAGON card. So I will have track plays and all that good stuff for all of these cards on the MMALOTN Patreon page. But again, in terms of extra content this week, that means no top 3 lock of the night candidates, no chalk or not, no free parlay. You know what? For the Locky two-step, Locky Trinity, and the top 3 prop bets and long shot, I'll drop that in the comment section below probably by Friday evening. So in the comment section, I'll pin it. I'll pin my, my most confident plays and picks there, the link for that on the Patreon. But under that, I'll also put the free parlay and my 3 best props as well. So at least we can get that out of the way for you guys. So I appreciate you guys bearing with your boy in terms of understanding. Obviously, got some family stuff to deal with when I get out of town. So I don't want to impede my time to spend with them by just working myself to death here to get this content out for you guys. Hopefully the full card breakdown is enough for you. All right. Shout out to everybody that jumped in onto the live stream this past weekend to watch the fights. We did it through the Patreon as well as the members only on YouTube, but I think moving forward, I'll continue to do live streams on Patreon whenever I'm in town and can watch the fights live. I'll probably do them strictly on Patreon moving forward because we got a decent group of guys in there. So if you want to hop in on that, obviously this weekend I won't be able to stream, but for the next UFC event, I'll be able to do so. All right, let's quickly recap UFC 322 for the lock of the night play and the dog of the night play. What can I say? I was overconfident on the Beneil Dariush side of things, knowing that he has a bit of a durability issue. I did not expect BSD to starch him that quickly. I expect him to maybe land one or two shots, then get to his grappling, and that from there, that's where Dariush would start to take over. But the first punch that BSD lands, Dariush goes down, and sometimes that's just the name of the game. So unfortunately, we have to take an L on our Lock of the Night play there. I think we went 1-1 over the weekend for Lock of the Night plays. Our KSW play with hit with relative ease. So we're now 55-38 on the year for Lock of the Night plays. That's a 59% hit rate. Absolutely atrocious. More than likely, we're going to be taking an L on the Lock of the Night play this year. I believe that's the first in many years, probably the first ever. I'd have to look back at my statistics, but I'm pretty sure that's the first time ever. That was kind of just the year. For Dog of the Night plays, I think we went 1-2 or 1-3 over this past weekend, but we did lose our dog of the night for the UFC 322 card, which was Jose Chepe Mariscal, as he went up against Pat Sabatini in a rematch. And I thought Mariscal improved more as an MMA fighter, but Sabatini's grappling is just next level, and he was able to completely shut down the game of Mariscal and grind that fight out. Big win for Sabatini there, and unfortunately an L for us. So that now brings our dog of the night record to 53 63-64 on the year for a 45% hit rate. Very unfortunate, but, still in the profit for Dog of the Night. I'm happy about that. All right, I already got my plugs out of the way for you guys. There is no UFC event the following week, which is great. And I don't think there is even a regional event that I'm going to be covering next weekend. I think it's just an off week altogether. Yeah, after this weekend, we're back on December 5th for PFL MENA, Cage Warriors 199, and then UFC 323 on December 6th. So I'll have an off week next week, thank God. I will be moving that week as well, so there's a ton going on in my personal life, so I'll definitely need that week off. But yeah, all right, I'm blabbering too much here. We got, I believe, 14 fights to talk about for this UFC Qatar card or Qatar card. And it starts off in the heavyweight division with UFC newcomers Merrick Bujlo, probably butchering it. I should have listened to the names before actually recording here, so I apologize, but I'm just going to go with Merrick. We got Merrick coming in at plus 130, going up against Denzel Freeman, who comes in at minus 150. Now, the line for this fight actually dropped maybe less than an hour before I hit record here, so there are still strict limits on this, so I wouldn't be surprised to see the line swing either way by the time I'm even done recording this podcast for you guys. But let's talk about the Merrick side of things here, who's 6-0, all 6 of his wins coming in the first round, 3 of those wins coming in less than a minute. This guy's faced almost no opposition. All of his wins have come in less than 2 minutes as well. He's a BJJ black belt, looks to take his opponents to the ground almost immediately, and then from there he's able to get to a full mount or take the back of his opponents and then either muster up a TKO finish or a submission, as I believe he has a rear naked choke on his record as well. The last 3 wins were hilarious because he got these guys down immediately and then they just shelled up right away and he just let elbows go, and the elbows weren't even landing on the head. The elbows were landing completely on the forearms, and he just mustered up so much and the guys from bottom couldn't do anything to buck out of those bad positions, and the referee was forced to step in and stop those fights. And that's the thing with regional MMA, especially in the heavyweight division. There's just not a lot of talent out there, so if you have enough of a either athleticism edge or if you have a BJJ black belt, you can really stand out from the rest of the landscape and make your way to the UFC as quickly and as easily as Merrick did, and that's the case here. But unfortunately for him, I think he's going up against a very tough Denzel Freeman, who comes in as the LFA heavyweight champion, or I guess former now since he's in the UFC. He's riding a 2-fight winning streak with his only loss coming in against Isaiah Pinson, who I believe is a underrated fighter who's kind of been underachieving on the regional scene now. But very close split decision loss. I believe that was on the PFL Challengers card, but he's been able to bounce back with finishes over Steven Asplund, who obviously just got signed to the UFC recently, and then over Hugo Cunha. I believe he got a win on the UFC. I know he got a win on the Contender Series. I don't remember if he got to the UFC or had a UFC fight yet. But the next win for Freeman was against Hugo Cunha, where, a lot of grueling grappling, and then eventually Freeman was able to get him out of there in the second round. Freeman, wrestler by trade, but he does have a Taekwondo background as well. So he's very soft and light on his feet, moves very well. He's very fast. He gets his kicks up there very quickly. But one thing I'm kind of upset about is that it doesn't seem like he's taking mixed martial arts all that seriously. After winning the LFA title against Hugo Cunha, he called out Steven Asplund again. He didn't even call to get to the UFC, so he didn't really care to get to the next level. But luckily, an opportunity opened itself here for him to actually make it to the big show. Very good wrestler, very good striker, 34 years old still, so at heavyweight standards, he's pretty much in his prime. And this guy's going to be a handful to deal with for a lot of fighters. And I think this is a fight that he can easily run over Merrick Bujlo. I don't think Freeman, I think Freeman will have a striking advantage. And I think that even if Merrick is able to get Freeman down, Freeman does a great job in terms of working right back to his feet. And then from there, I think Merrick's going to start to struggle, especially with this being the first time he's facing resistance in mixed martial arts. And then from there, I think Freeman will eventually be able to muster up a finish. This could look similar to the Hugo Cunha fight. And I think we'll see Freeman eventually get that finish in the second round. But I love him at minus 150. If he stays around this range after those limits open up, I'd love to, go berserk on this line here, but I really like Freeman, and I think he pummels Merrick within 2 rounds. All right, next up, we got another UFC debut here as in the welterweight division, as we have Nicholas Dalby coming in at plus 250, welcoming in Sajid Izagakhmaev, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Dalby is coming off of his first ever 2-fight losing streak now, and the last time was actually the first time he had actually got finished in his pro MMA career, as he got knocked out by Randy Brown in a fight that was clearly filled with a lot of bad blood. There's a lot of heat going into that matchup. I think a lot of it had to do with Dalby calling Brown out for constantly eye-poking people, and I think there was an eye poke in that first round, but Brown actually got dropped in the first round by Dalby, and then in the second round, I think Dalby messed around a little bit too much in the pocket, and he ended up paying for it by getting clipped by Brown and eventually get knocked out there. Prior to that, Dalby went to a split decision against Rinat Fakhretdinov in a very close fight where Fakhretdinov struggled to hold Dalby down and get off on effective damage. I think Dalby had a good enough argument of winning that matchup, but one thing was for sure, that Dalby was not going to go just roll over and let Fakhretdinov get the win there as a big favorite. Dalby is a guy that's often relied on his physical attributes to try to get his wins, and especially at 41 years old, you start to wonder when that's going to start to subside, and then his opponents are going to start to get the better of him. The fact that he's on his first 2-fight losing streak here could be a sign of things to come for his decline, but again, when you look closer at those fights, the Fakhretdinov fight, very close. The Randy Brown fight, again, very chaotic, un-Dalby-like in a sense. And his last win was the first loss in Gabriel Bonfim's career, where we saw Dalby showcase great durability and then really put his foot on the gas in the second round once he sensed Bonfim was starting to slow down. So Dalby's still good. At 41 years old, I think he's a bit of an anomaly, especially, when you get guys at this division up there in age, they usually start to slow down. That might be the case for Dalby, but again, I think he might be an exception to that rule, considering how good of shape he's normally in. Now, he's going up against Izagakhmaev, who I believe he's riding a 5-fight winning streak as of now, but he hasn't competed in 3 years. So this one was kind of a head-scratcher in terms of a signing from the UFC, but obviously firmly entrenched alongside Khabib and the Nurmagomedov team. You got to believe that he got a fast track to the I wouldn't call it a fast track, but at least an easy foot in the door to get into the UFC. And obviously his 22-2 record helps with that. His last loss actually came in early 2021, and it was against eventual UFC signee Carlston Harris. A fight where Izagakhmaev could not really get off on his wrestling, and then as he started to slow down, Harris was able to wrap up a beautiful, I think it was anaconda choke, a front choke of some sort, and then put Izagakhmaev out. Obviously, a guy from Dagestan, a lot of wrestling, a lot of smothering wrestling. His striking's not all that great. I know he knocked out Shinya Aoki in his last matchup, but if you guys know Shinya Aoki, he's been around for way too long. And still even fought this past weekend, if I'm not mistaken. But that's not really a win that you should be hanging your hat on too much. I believe the over 2.5 is probably the best approach in this fight. I think Izagakhmaev will get off on his wrestling and gets a little bit of control time. And this could play out like the Rinat Fakhretdinov fight for Nicholas Dalby. It's going to be close. So I'd say if there's any value, it's probably on the Dalby side. When you mix in the whole, fight taking place in the Middle East and possible judging and all that type of stuff, again, I don't read too much into it. I would rather lean more on the odds while taking that into perspective. And you're getting plus 250 on a guy like Dalby who's not going to settle for bad position. And I think he even has a cardio edge here over Izagakhmaev. So the prediction is actually going to be the newcomer, Izagakhmaev. I think he's going to get the takedowns. I think he'll get some control. I think he'll get off on some damage. But Dalby will surely make this fight close once it hits the scorecards. Thus, the prediction will be Izagakhmaev by decision. But in terms of a bet, I might take a little bit of a sprinkle on Dalby, considering how wide the odds are here, and the fact that I don't think Izagakhmaev is as good as his record makes him seem and what the odds make him seem. All right. Next up in the lightweight division, we got Nurullo Aliev coming in at minus 275, welcoming a European standout here in Shamrock, who comes in at plus 235. I actually believe his name is Shaquem Rock, but he mainly goes by Shamrock, so we're going to go by Shamrock. Aliev, highly touted prospect, a little bit of a dark horse, mainly due to the fact that he hasn't been all that active since coming into the UFC through the 2022 season of the Contender Series. He's 2-0 since then. He had a fight against Rafael Alves back in 2023, and then he started the year off. He was the first fight of the 2025 UFC calendar when he took on Joe Solecki, and he was able to outgrind him, outwork him, and just pummel him from that top position and win that fight on the scorecards. Aliev is very impressive. This kid scrambles very well, has very good wrestling, good chain wrestling. His striking is a lot of power punches where he tries to close the distance with it by either knocking his opponent down or utilizing that to mask a takedown and level change. And then from there, once he gets in on the hips, he can transition between different types of takedowns and more often than not be successful with it. And that's what makes him so difficult to deal with. And his cardio is very high level. So that's another issue to deal with when you have a guy that can continue to put that pressure on you and then just stay ahead and stay a step ahead the entire time. I'm glad that he's finally getting back in the cage here, but I'm hoping that he's going to be a little bit more active. Again, he's only 24. I think he turns 25 next month or early December. So he still has a ton of time to really carve out a legacy for himself. But this is a guy that could potentially be challenging for the title in the next 3 years or so, depending on how active he stays. Now he's going up against Shamrock, who comes in with a 12-1-1 record, most recently competing for OKTAGON, where he went 4-0-1 with the company. His last fight was in May against one of the veterans there, Attila Korkmaz, and Rock won that fight by split decision. It was a very close fight, and one that Korkmaz took on very short notice after numerous opponents pulled out from Rock after a couple of fights had fallen through. Shamrock, BJJ black belt, I believe, a guy that loves to take fights to the ground and try to strangle his opponents. He's a close training partner of Paddy Pimblett. His wrestling, in my opinion, could use a little bit more work at times, but he's done a great job in terms of utilizing his long, lanky frame to get a hold of his opponents, jump on their back, and utilize his long limbs to sink in chokes and try to get the finish. 9 of his 12 wins have come by submission, so it's obvious what he's looking to do once he gets a hold of his opponents. 4 of his 5 last wins have actually come by submission as well. That Korkmaz fight was really close. I think Korkmaz did a good job in terms of defending, landing some damage, showcasing good grappling defense, and I think that's the key to beating a guy like Shamrock, and I think that's the key to why Aliev finds himself at minus 275. He is the better wrestler, for sure. Rock might be the better BJJ specialist, but I've been very impressed with Aliev's submission defense, grappling defense, and I think once Rock fails on a couple of submission attempts, he's slowly going to start to break as Aliev starts to muster up more and more damage from that top position. I think Rock is more hype than anything. He could pick up a couple UFC wins, don't get me wrong, but this is a very tough ask for him in his UFC debut to go up against a killer like Aliev. So I'm going to go Aliev by decision, and I wouldn't mind parlaying him either at that minus 275 line. All right, next up, in the middleweight division, we got Ismail Naurdiev coming in at minus 130, going up against Ryan Loder, who comes in at plus 110. Now, earlier today, when I studied up on this matchup, we had Naurdiev at minus 150, so there is love coming in on the American Ryan Loder to bring that line down a little bit. I'll be interested to see how much further that line starts to trickle. But we'll start off on the Naurdiev side of things now, who is now 1-1 in the UFC upon returning. He did go 2-2 back in 2019 and 2020 with the promotion. He got let go, and then he went 4-3 on the regional scene. I believe most of those fights taking place under the Brave CF banner, and then the UFC decided to side him again, and he did start off his second stint with a win over a very muzzled, very depressed, mentally defeated Bruno Silva, who started talking about his mental struggles after that loss to Naurdiev. And Naurdiev was able to do whatever he wanted that night without much threat coming back his way. Then he went up against the Iron Turtle. I believe that was back in June, and that was a tough one for him. He had some decent success in the second round, but got 2 points taken away after he landed a very blatant knee to a downed Turtle, and then obviously we saw the Turtle win the first and third rounds, and he was able to pick up an easy decision victory that night. But Naurdiev, fun Muay Thai striker, good kicks, good combinations, but he has way too many holes in his striking defense and even his grappling defense, which is why he's been finished more often than not. And that's kind of his struggle. At 29 years old with 33 or 32 fights of experience, you'd expect him to be a little bit cleaner with some of his technical work, but he leaves too many openings for better grapplers or better strikers to get the better of him, hence why he's been so up and down, especially in the UFC, now with a 3-3 record overall under the biggest lights. Now, on the Ryan Loder side of things, I did take him as a pretty big underdog last time around against Almabayev, and I failed to look into the strength and athleticism advantage of Bakoyev, but not to mention also the wrestling that Bakoyev had. I thought Loder was going to be able to wear on him, slow him down, really force him to suck some wind, and then start to take over. But Loder was really unsuccessful with getting any of his grappling going. And then once Bakoyev was able to back out into open space, he was able to land big shots and really hurt Loder and eventually take him out, I believe, within 2 or 3 minutes. But Loder is still a guy with some decent potential. I know he's 34 years old, 9 fights of experience, but he is a very strong wrestler that if he has enough of an advantage over his opponents and isn't really behind it athletically speaking, can be a very difficult fighter to deal with. He's very, he puts a lot of wear and tear on his opponents, pushes them against the cage, looks to drag them to the ground, and then from there, he doesn't just settle. He's looking for opportunities to posture up and land some ground and pound, as I believe the majority of his wins have actually come by TKO. He's faced some heavy punches in the past as well and still passed the test, but it was just that Bakoyev puzzle that he was unable to crack, and I guess he should have been at, that plus 300 underdog that he was that night. But here against Naurdiev, I think this is a very, very favorable matchup for him. Naurdiev is a good striker, obviously a better striker than Ryan Loder, but the issues and problems that Naurdiev gets him in are something that Loder will be able to exploit, and that's being tied up against the cage for a little bit too long, getting taken down, not having many answers off of his back. I have no doubt that Naurdiev could stuff the first few takedowns, but I think Loder will continuously be looking to apply that pressure, and I think he can... I think he has the option to change levels if he's getting bombed on by Naurdiev here, and that wasn't going to work against Bakoyev, but I think he'll work here against Naurdiev. Mixing the fact that, firmly entrenched at Team Alpha Male, training alongside the likes of Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, Max Griffin, and all those other guys there in NorCal, I think this is a very winnable fight for Loder, and I like him as the underdog here, so I'm not surprised as to why the line is starting to trickle down. So I'm going to go Loder, and I think Loder actually finds a way to posture up and get a TKO on this spot as well. So I'm going to go Loder and Loder by finish. All right, next up in the bantamweight division, we got Beksat Almakhan coming in at minus 120, going up against Alexandre Topuria, who comes in at plus 100. Now we'll go on the Almakhan. I want to say Almakhaev for some reason, probably because Asu Almabayev fights a couple fights later. Maybe that's what I'm getting mixed up with. But Beksat picked up his first UFC win last time around when he knocked out Brad Katona in about 64 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. Beautiful uppercut, timed it perfectly, just waited for Katona to open up, and it's kind of like they drilled that over and over again and knew as soon as that Katona was throwing that I believe it was a jab, that he would level change into a takedown. Almakhan timed it perfectly and landed an uppercut that flatlined Katona there, and that showed, the work that Almakhan is doing over there at American Top Team is definitely paying off for him. He came into the UFC with the card stacked against him, taking on Umar Nurmagomedov. He was 17-1 at the time, but it seems like Tapology has really whittled down a lot of his wins because they were modified MMA rules. So now he has a 12-2 record rather than, he would have been 18-2. Should those wins have stayed on his record. He's a very solid fighter, trains out of American Top Team, has been mixing it up with the Kazakhstani guys as well, alongside Asu Almabayev, like I said, who train or fights later on in this card. Smothering grappling as we normally expect, improved striking. This kid looks like he is improving and becoming a better fighter, especially with everything he's doing over there at American Top Team. He's going up against the brother of lightweight champion Ilia Topuria, Alexandre, who had a successful UFC debut when he was able to win a decision against Colby Thickness earlier this year. That night, Topuria utilized a similar approach to what his brother normally does, and that's just walk and stalk his opponents down, landing big shots, landing big boxing combinations, and looking to take his head off. And then in the third round, Thickness actually went for a takedown, got it reversed immediately, and then Topuria grinded him out from that top position for the rest of the round. Topuria is a guy that I still have a lot of question marks about, though, right? Going into his UFC debut, all of his opponents, I believe all but one of his opponents, had a 500 or losing record. He was able to squash a lot of those guys. There wasn't much resistance outside of the one fight that he lost, where I believe he got outgrinded and didn't really have much of an answer there. And then after that fight, he took off about 6 years and then came back and has now rattled off 4 straight victories. And you got to believe the only reason he's in the UFC is because of his brother. But I'm not saying he's a scrub by any means. He just has a lot more to prove. He's only 29 years old, so there is still plenty of time for him to kind of leave an impression on people and showcase that he can fight either to the level of his brother or close enough that he can still find himself in the top 10 of a pretty stacked bantamweight division. Unfortunately for him, I just think Almakhan is better. I think Almakhan has the better strength of schedule. He's faced way more resistance throughout his career. His striking should be slick enough to kind of counter that power striking approach of Topuria. And I also think that Almakhan could be end up being the better wrestler. Again, this is all with very low confidence. I just haven't been impressed with what I've seen from Topuria going into his UFC career, and he still has a lot to do to prove himself. So I'm not going to say it with a whole lot of confidence, but I am going to take Almakhan here, and I think he ends up grinding this fight out, landing a little bit more damage, just getting those crucial, significant moments that'll help him edge this one out and win it on the scorecards. All right, let's move a division down now as we talk about flyweights, and it's going to be between Tagir Ulanbekov, who comes in at minus 200, taking on Kyoji Horiguchi, who comes in at plus 170. Yes, Horiguchi is back in the UFC after 10 years away. He's looking to end his career at the biggest stage of them all and try to crack or get another crack at the flyweight title. But we'll talk about Tagir Ulanbekov first, who is now on a 4-fight winning streak. His last loss came in early 2022 against Tim Elliott, but since then he's pulled off 4 straight wins, including 2 finishes over Nate Maness and Cody Durden. Last time around, he went up against Azat Maxim, and he went 0 of 8 on takedowns, but he still kept the pressure and offense high enough, especially in those first 2 rounds, to easily win this fight on the scorecards. But it was surprising that it was Maxim who was the one landing takedowns that night, but it still wasn't enough for him to get his hand raised. Ulanbekov has improved his striking game enough that he's not in complete trouble if he's forced to strike with his opponents, and that's exactly what we saw last time. He could also initiate fights up against the cage with his clinch, and is just grueling work there where he's able to just lean on opponents, land some dirty knees, some dirty boxing, and really wear opponents down that way. He's 34 years old, though, so he's going to have to be a little bit more active in terms of fighting and getting more fights in if he hopes to ever fight for a UFC title while he's still close enough to his prime. His long, lanky range helps him sync up chokes that some opponents find difficult to fight against. 5'70", 70-inch reach, that's usually on the taller, longer side of the flyweight division, and he's going to hold that advantage here, 2 inches taller and 5 inches longer than Kyoji Horiguchi. Now, like I said, it's been 10 and a half years since we saw Horiguchi, 10 and a half years since he fought for a title in the UFC when he went up against Mighty Mouse and was submitted with a last-second armbar in that 5-round matchup. Horiguchi went 7-1 with the promotion, got that title fight against Mighty Mouse, and then he won his next 3 fights, but then eventually either got released or parted ways with the UFC and joined Rizin. He ended up going 14-1 with Rizin, with his only loss in that promotion coming to Kai Asakura, and then he was able to avenge that loss a year and a half later by knocking Asakura out in the first round as well. Horiguchi then challenged for the bantamweight title for Bellator, and it looked like he was winning about 3.5 rounds until Sergio Perez landed a beautiful spinning back fist that knocked Horiguchi clean out. Very unfortunate moment there, and you can ask Magomedov, who met his same fate just a couple weeks back when Perez competed for PFL last. That was followed up with another decision loss at the hands of Patchy Mix, who showed at bantamweight that Kyoji Horiguchi was just not going to be strong enough to deal with the strong grapplers of that division. Now he's 5-0 since that loss to Mix, won a couple fights, even avenged his loss to Sergio Pettis under the Rizin banner, and I think he's more than ready to come back to the UFC. He's very well-rounded, very strict slick striker with good power, good swiftness with his strikes as well. And then he obviously has that wrestling that he can lean on. A lot of that could also be attributed to his time at American Top Team, which has helped him to prepare for these high-level matchups and be as successful as he has been in this stage of his career, especially with him turning 35 back in October. Now, here against Ulanbekov, it's a interesting fight, but I really believe the wrestling of Ulanbekov will be the difference. Horiguchi has wrestling himself, and he'll have the striking edge in this fight, but I think he's going to struggle to get away from Ulanbekov and create enough space to exaggerate that striking advantage. Ulanbekov will be able to stay close enough to him, chest to chest, or even keep his forehead on his chin, push him against the cage, land a few takedowns, re-wrestle, land a few more takedowns. But I think that Ulanbekov's smothering pressure will be too much for Horiguchi to deal with, and that should lead to an Ulanbekov decision victory. Our next up in the light heavyweight division, no need to spend too much time on this. We got Abdulrahman Yakhyaev coming in at minus 1,200, going up against Rafael Cerqueira, who comes in at plus 750. Yakhyaev is a beast, especially in the light heavyweight division where there's not a whole lot of talent. He only took 30 seconds to dispose of his Dana White Contender Series opponent, in which he was a minus 900 favorite. And I expect him to do the same thing here against Rafael Cerqueira, who I'm very surprised still has a UFC job, but Yakhyaev should run through him. Whether it's with a quick takedown or just landing big power, I expect Yakhyaev to get this done within 2 minutes. The under 1.5 is at minus 240. I think that's a steal. I'm sure Yakhyaev round one will probably be around minus 200, minus 185 or something like that. But I'm taking all those early round props here on Yakhyaev and the under 1.5. And yeah, like I said, I'm not spending too much time on this. Cerqueira does not deserve to be in the UFC. He has a glass chin, and Yakhyaev will get him out of there, either TKO or a club and sub. Yakhyaev, smash. All right. Next up in the featherweight division, we have a highly touted debut as we got Bogdan Grad coming in at minus 210, welcoming Cage Warriors veteran Luke Riley, who comes in at minus 250. Now, Riley, there's a lot to talk about that kid once I get over to his side. We're going to talk about Bogdan Grad first, who's looking to bounce back after he lost to Muhammad Naimov from a couple months back. And that was a fight where Grad had some grappling success, specifically in that second round. But I thought he got a little bit too aggressive in that third round, got a position reverse, and Naimov was able to grind out most of the rest of that third round. Grad did have some decent success in the last minute, but it was not enough to undo what Naimov was able to do earlier in that round. Grad is a fast, explosive BJJ black belt who looks to smother his opponents and try to find submission positions or TKO opportunities if he sees an opening for it. He's 30 years old, used to be a lightweight, but he learned a big lesson when he got knocked out by Tom Nolan pretty quickly back on the 2023 season of the Contender Series. But since then, obviously got back onto the Contender Series in 2024, got that win over Michael Aswell in a very close fight, dealt with some adversity against Lucas Alexander in his UFC debut, but managed to muster up a comeback and get that finish in the second round. And then I think he was just a little bit out-muscled in that Naimov fight and couldn't get off on enough success of his own. But this guy is all gas, loves to move forward, loves to apply pressure, loves to get the takedowns, loves to land big shots, but he's really good in terms of controlling opponents, especially when he's able to establish a dominant position. Now, he's going up against Luke Riley, who comes in with an 11-0 record, a close training partner of Paddy the Baddy, and a guy that a lot of people have been calling to come to the UFC for a long time. I will say this. I'm a big fan of Luke Riley. I love Cage Warriors. I love watching his fights, but I feel like his hype is kind of preceding him, and I feel like it's one of those situations where, the hype may not meet the talent. He's a very nasty striker. He's very entertaining. He's very fun to watch, but there are often spots in his fights where you can see him either find himself in trouble, whether it's getting rocked like he did against Alexander Luff, or even getting out grappled like he did against Tariel Abasov for the first 5 to 6 minutes of his last matchup. but he shows good enough defense that he can recover from getting rocked and then get back on the gas himself, or he can start stuffing the takedowns and then get back on the gas with his output and his volume and look for a finish like he did against Abasov. I will give him credit for his win against John De Jesus, who may not make it to the UFC, or, well, I guess he's probably never going to make it to the UFC at this point in his career, but is a very tested and tough veteran that is a good barometer for a lot of these prospects looking to break to the next level. And Riley was able to just, I think he clean swept him on the scorecards, pretty much outstruck him, landed better damage, landed better output, and that was enough for him to get the win. But now fighting UFC level talent, I think Riley could show some holes in his game, and I think he might struggle in certain aspects. Here against Grad, I think we'll see Riley showcase good enough takedown defense and grappling defense that he can end up landing some big shots of his own, and he might be able to muster up a finish. But I think the odds are just too wide. I think he was about minus 285 just yesterday. Now he's down at minus 250, and I think for good reason. I think Grad can put him into some bad positions with his grappling, and Grad has much better cardio than Tariel Abasov did, and we saw what kind of positions that Abasov was able to get against Riley. I think Abasov even won that first round, right? So if Grad can do the same, put that pressure on Riley and really just force him to grapple and get him in these bad positions, Grad could either find a submission or even just win this fight on the scorecards. I like Riley. I do. I'm going to pick him to win this fight by TKO, but the odds are just too wide for my liking here. And the last thing I'll say about this fight, Riley's not a crazy one-punch knockout specialist. This is a guy that is a death by 1,000 cuts kind of striker and finisher. Once he lands a big shot, he can kind of smell blood in the water, and then he's just going to put a barrage of shots together, and that's usually enough to let the referee step in. But he's not just going to one-punch knock out Grad. At least I'd be surprised if he one-punch knocked out Grad. And if he has to use that death by 1,000 cuts approach here on Grad, I think Grad can do enough to stay safe to not get finished. Like, he might get hurt, might get wobbled, but I think he might be able to get on to Riley or get a hold of Riley and then really get his wits back about him and then try to get back to his game plan. But in terms of a prediction, I'm going to go Riley with very low confidence. I think he musters up a TKO. I think it's very low chances, hence why minus 250 is just not worth it. But again, similar to the Nicholas Dalby fight from earlier in this card, I might take a little bit of a shot on Grad because I see the grappling opportunities for him and the ways that he can win the fight that way. So I'll go Riley by TKO, but if I'm putting my money anywhere, it would be on the Grad side of things. Our next up, we got Alex Perez in the flyweight division coming in at plus 170, going up against Asu Almabayev, who comes in at minus 200. Now, it really looked like Perez was starting to turn things around early in 2024 after he was able to knock out Matthias Nicolau in the main event of a UFC fight night. After that, he was given an opportunity against Tatsuro Taira, and for the first 6 minutes, he looked really good. He won the first round on all judges' scorecards, stuffing the takedowns and really putting the pressure on Tyrell with his striking advantage. And then Tyrell was able to get the back and leap on the back of Perez midway through that second round. And that's where we got that weird scenario where Tyrell was able to get the back. He kind of grapevined the legs of Perez while standing, and then he like torqued back, and it seemed to blow out Perez's knee, and Perez was forced to tap, or I guess it was a TKO via injury was the final result. But Perez has been out of action since that matchup. It's been about a year and a half now. He knocked out Matthias Nicolau April 2024. I think it was only a few months after that he ended up going up against Tyrell. So he's been out of there. I think it was May or June. But it's been a while since Perez has been in action. 33 years old, trying to come back from a knee injury like that. Not to mention his whole career has been injury riddled. It'll be interesting to see if he can bounce back here and try to still get some success. Known as a wrestler, has a good scrambling game. His boxing has obviously improved a lot. He has a good calf kicking game that he can rely on if he needs to as well. But I just wonder what this layoff and this injury will do for him, especially going up against a tough out like Asu Almabayev upon your return. Now, Almabayev was able to get back to his winning ways with a win over Jose Ochoa last time. And that was a fight where he found himself as, I think it was either a very small underdog or it was pretty much a pick-em fight. And I felt that was a great buy low spot for Almabayev, who had come up short against Manal Kape in a short notice UFC main event just a few months prior. Cap was able to stop all of the takedowns from Almabayev that night. I think he stopped the 6 takedowns, I believe it was. And then from there, stuffed all 6 of Almabayev's takedowns and then pretty much lit him up on the feet. Now, Almabayev is not a bad striker. There's levels to the shit, and Kopp is just far ahead of Almabayev on the feet, and we saw a full showcase of that for 2.5 rounds until Kopp eventually mustered up that TKO finish in the 3rd round. Almabayev is still very talented. He has a ton of potential, 31 years old, 22-3 record, solid strength of schedule, and I think this is another matchup where he can go out there and showcase why he's still one of the best flyweights on the roster. On paper, maybe Perez might be a better wrestler, but I think Almabayev could be the better scrambler here. I think he has the better gas tank. I think he can do a great job in terms of just putting Perez on the defensive. Perez might have a little bit of a technical striking advantage, but I believe the speed and power of Almabayev on the feet, mixed in with the grappling and smothering clinch game and wrestling of Almabayev, I think that's going to cause Perez problems in terms of getting off on any success of his own. Don't let all that red fool you on Perez's last 5. The guy's talented, and he's obviously facing high-level competition that entire time, but I believe Almabayev deserves to be amongst those guys, and I think we'll see him go out there and grind this fight out, win it on the scorecards to get minus 200 here. I can see absolutely somebody making a case for Perez at plus 170, but I feel like minus 200 on Almabayev is a great number to jump on top of. So I'll go Almabayev and Almabayev by decision. All right, we go from the smallest men's weight class to the heaviest men's weight class in the heavyweight division here, as we have Sergey Spivac coming in at plus 120, going up against Shamil Gaziev, who comes in at minus 140. Now, Spivac is on a 2-fight losing streak, both fights where he really struggled to get to his grappling game and ultimately ended up paying the price. First try, Tim Almeida was able to get him into a bad spot and get that TKO position. And then last time around, Spivac was unable to really apply his grappling against Waldo Cortez Acosta. And Cortez Acosta was able to just land big shots on him, specifically through those first 10 minutes. Spivac had a little bit of success in that 3rd round, but it was just not enough for him to get his hand raised, and he lost on the scorecards. Spivac is still 30 years old and has accrued a ton of great experience, especially with the high-level guys he's been going up against throughout his UFC career. But I just think the lack of athleticism at times kind of holds him back from being even more successful. We know how good he is with his grappling, and he does a great job with his submission game once he's able to establish that top position, but he's not able to do it against guys that are able to stop those takedowns or guys that can provide enough resistance with the grappling and really cause him to struggle there. You know, the impressive win that he had last time around in his last one was Marcin Tybura, where he kind of seemed to invite the takedown from Tybura, and then I think he surprised Tybura by throwing up as much submissions as he did, and he was able to catch him in an armbar pretty quickly in that main event slot. But I think that, a little bit slow on the feet, has tried to work on his striking, but I still think that's somewhere where he feels the most uncomfortable. It's all about the clinch game and takedowns for him if he hopes to get his hand raised in these fights. Now, he's going up against Shamil Gaziev, who is now on a 2-fight winning streak after suffering his first pro loss early in 2024 when he went up against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and it seemed like he gassed after that first round, and eventually, I believe he quit on the stool before the 4th or 5th round because he just really couldn't get anything going. But then he came back against Dontel Mays and showed that he can go a full 15 if he needs to, and he really put it on Mays, whether it was with his takedowns or with his dirty boxing up against the cage and really just wearing on Mays with that clinch. And then in the 3rd round, I believe he got back to his takedowns and he was able to grind that fight out from there. Last time I looked to fade Gaziev actually with Thomas Peterson, as historically speaking, Peterson had pretty good durability, and I thought he'd be able to eat Gaziev's biggest shots, and then from there, Gaziev would probably look to wrestle. Peterson, solid wrestler. I thought he'd be able to stifle that, and I thought Peterson would start to run away with his cardio, but the first big shot that Gaziev landed, Peterson went down, and that was it. So I really underrated Gaziev's knockout power that night, and it showed in spades. At his best, he smothers his opponents with his size and his grappling, takes opponents down and smashes them immediately. He doesn't often go to decisions. He's pretty good at finishing his opponents when he sees the openings. But as he climbs the rankings, he knows that he's going to have to go deeper into the waters if he hopes to get wins, because guys are not going to be as easy to put away as they have been coming into the UFC. Now here against Spivac and Gaziev, very close fight. I feel like the strength and the wrestling of Gaziev could cause Spivac some problems here. From a defensive standpoint, I'm sure Spivac is going to be looking to get this to the ground. But I think we'll see Gaziev kind of just utilize a cage clinch, look to wear Spivac down up against the cage, land some dirty boxing, some knees up the middle, and then maybe even look to break and land some big power from there. I think Gaziev is the more threatening striker with the power that he possesses. But I have question marks about Gaziev off his back in case Spivac does look to take him down. I wonder if Gaziev will be able to work back to his feet. So that's the big question mark I have going into this fight. I'm still going to lean with Gaziev as my prediction. Not a big amount of confidence there, but I just feel like his physicality will be a little bit too much for Spivac, and that should eventually lead to Gaziev landing that big shot and getting Spivac out of there probably by the second round. So give me Gaziev and Gaziev by knockout. But again, close heavyweight fight. All right, in the welterweight division now, we got Jack Hermansson coming in at plus 205, going up against Miktaibek Orolbai, who comes in at minus 240. Now you heard that right. This is a welterweight matchup, and Jack Hermansson is dropping down to that weight class as a 37-year-old, which to me does not make much sense. He's been in the UFC for over 9 years. He started his run with the UFC 7-2, which put him into that main event against Jared Cannonier in September of 2019. And then since then, he's been exchanging wins and losses ever since. From wins against Kelvin Gastelum, Edmund Shabazian, Chris Curtis, and Joe Pyfer, to now losses against Jared Cannonier, Marvin Vettori, Sean Strickland, Roman Dolidze, and then most recently getting knocked out by Gregory Rodriguez after a pretty extended layoff. Hermansson had that upset victory against Joe Pyfer back in February of 2024, but was unable to follow up on it as he was forced to sit out of action for 16 months due to injury, surgery, and rehab. And then to go up against a killer like Rodriguez in his return fight, it just wasn't meant to be. He comes, I believe, from a Greco wrestling background. He's often used striking approaches to try to get the better of his opponents. That's what just sticking and moving, utilizing his long range and reach. A lot of footwork, dancing around at distance. Not the most entertaining fights, like the Chris Curtis fight and even the Joe Pyfer fight. Just staying at distance and trying to chip away and land more damage than his opponents. And even that, it's minimal damage with the type of strikes that he's been landing. But I think his durability is slowly starting to go. He's 37 years old, all those injuries, that rehab, and now going down 15 pounds. I think that's going to be a lot for Hermansson's body to try to deal with. He's going up again, not only does he have to deal with that weight cut, he has to deal with a madman, the caveman himself, Miktaibek Orolbai, who was able to bounce back into the win column after coming up short against Mateusz Rąbecki in a Fight of the Year candidate. He did manage to bounce back. I believe it was in June when he went up against Tafik Musayev, and he was able to get that Kimura in that first round. That fight embodied everything that Orolbai is. All pressure, all grappling, all top pressure, not laying praying at all, really looking for finishes the entire time, and then he eventually mustered up that Kimura to get the finish. But this guy has very solid cardio. His hands could use a little bit of work, technically speaking, but he does a great job in terms of threatening with his power and then getting to his wrestling, where he does a great job in terms of chain wrestling, mat returning, keeping that dominant position, mustering up finishes. This guy's really good. And at 27 years old, I think this is a guy that could, find himself amongst the best of the welterweights with a little bit more experience. And this matchup specifically, I think he really runs over Hermansson. I really don't see where Hermansson wins this fight. Hermansson might be able to wrestle with him a little bit early, but I think once that pressure starts to catch up to Hermansson, Orolbai will start to get the better of him. And then I don't think it will take long after that for Orolbai to muster up a finish, whether it's a TKO or a submission. I'm thinking more so TKO, and I think he puts a hurting on Hermansson here. This is not a good fight for Hermansson in his welterweight debut. So I'm going to go Miktaibek Orolbai inside the distance. All right, next up in the light heavyweight division, we got Volkan Oezdemir coming in at minus 230, going up against Alonzo Menifield, who comes in at plus 195. Now, Oezdemir is coming off of a decision loss against Carlos Ulberg, where he tried going to his grappling, where he went 0 of 2 on takedowns in the first round. Then he's like, that's probably not going to work. let's just stick with my bread and butter with the striking. And that was still not enough either, as we've seen Alberg obviously skyrocket into a point where he could probably fight for a title in his next fight. But Oezdemir really struggled in that matchup to try to get off on his own offense. Oezdemir, a guy that really heavy-footed, loves to walk forward, loves to throw a lot of calf kicks, loves to throw a lot of power punches as well and try to get his opponents out that way. But is also a guy that can be out-grappled, like we saw in the Nikita Krylov fight, and obviously outstruck by better strikers like we saw in the Carlos Alberg fight. He's always going to be a guy that sticks around in the UFC, in my opinion, because he can just do enough to avoid extended losing streaks. And he can, muster up 2 wins together. He's been struggling to get more than 3 straight wins since 2017. He's had a few opportunities, but always comes up short in that third fight where he either ends up, more often not, losing by decision. He's going up against Alonzo Menifield now, who's on a 2-fight winning streak after going 0-2 in 2024, getting knocked out by the aforementioned Carlos Alberg, and then even getting knocked out by Azamat Murzakanov. He was able to bounce back with a close split decision victory over Julius Walker, who came in on very short notice. And that was a grueling back and forth fight with both guys looking to get success with the clinch, pushing each other up against the cage, trying to get off on some dirty boxing and stuff. But it was Menifield who was able to land a little bit more effective damage for 2 of those judges to score the fight in his favor. Then he went up against Umar Sy and pulled off a big upset that night as he was able to stuff the takedowns of Sy, specifically in the first and third rounds. He landed more damage compared to Sy, who was just looking for takedowns and really couldn't get into much of a comfort zone with his striking. And that just goes to show the veterancy of Alonzo Menifield. This is a guy that often finds himself in an underdog in a lot of his fights, but is able to pull off the upset. The Umar Sy fight is one of those examples. I think the Dustin Jacoby fight as well, if I'm not mistaken. He has big power in his hands that could definitely change the tide of any fight, but he's sometimes a little bit lackluster with his activity, his own durability, obviously a big question mark. And I think this is one of those fights where Oezdemir could actually take advantage of the durability issues of Menifield. I was surprised, though, at the fact that Oezdemir is all the way up at minus 230. Menifield is one of those guys that's often overlooked and can be a live underdog, and this could be one of those occasions. But I'm going to be leaning more so on the under 2.5 than the chalky money line on Oezdemir. I think if Oezdemir looks minus 230, it's probably with him landing a big shot and putting Menifield away that way. And then even on the flip side, I think Menifield could possibly land a big shot of his own to get Oezdemir out there as well. So I saw I think the Oezdemir KO prop was roughly around like plus 120, plus 130, whereas the under 2.5 is around minus 135. So I'll probably take the under 2.5 instead of the prop of Oezdemir, especially to cover a potential Menifield knockout as well. So I'm going to go Oezdemir by knockout as my official prediction, but I do like the under 2.5 most in this matchup. All right. That brings us to the co-main event, which should easily be 5 rounds considering the stakes that are attached to this matchup. But it is a welterweight fight between former champion Belal Muhammad, who comes in at plus 195, going up against Ian Machado Garry, who comes in at minus 230. Now, Muhammad is coming off of a title fight loss back in May when he went up against Jack Della Maddalena. And I think that was more so being a victim to the perception that he has in the UFC's eyes. For some reason, they don't seem to like him. It took him a long time to finally earn himself a title shot. And then when he finally got the title shot, he won that fight against Leon Edwards. Then he was given that main event opportunity against Jack Della Maddalena to main event a pay-per-view. And, the word on the street was that the UFC just found his style to be a little bit too boring. So he's like, you know what? I'll strike with Jack Della Maddalena more just to give you guys more of an entertaining fight, and I'll still win this fight. That ended up not being the case. He made it entertaining by striking with JDM more than he should have. But then by the time he realized that he probably should wrestle a little bit more, it was a little bit too late. He had eaten too much damage. JDM had gotten his confidence way too high, and JDM was able to batter him, especially in that 5th round where he really bloodied the face of Muhammad to put a stamp on that fight and win it on the scorecards. Belal at his best is a guy that utilizes a high activity approach with a lot of pressure, forward movement, takedown attempts, mat returns, rinse and repeat. Technically speaking, he's not the best striker, but the way that he applies his pressure with that volume, that output, that up, down, that level change, it kind of short circuits his opponent's brains, which is why he's often able to get off on so much success. like what he did against Vicente Luque, Sean Brady, I was going to say Gegard Burns. No, Gilbert Burns. That fight, I believe, 5-round fight that he came in with a broken foot and still won with the style that he usually brings to the table. And then the Leon Edwards fight, probably one of his best performances. So he is a guy that needs that grappling style to be successful. And at 37 years old, he's probably still capable of it. And he did come out in an interview recently where he said that he wishes this fight was a 5-round fight because that obviously would favor him much more. And I think that's why the odds are the way that they are for this matchup. Because I think Garry is, at this stage of his career, is probably a little bit better and closer to his prime. Now, Garry suffered his first pro loss when he went up against Shavkat Rakhmonov last December. Had some decent success of his own. Had some, I believe he won maybe 1 or 2 rounds on the scorecards, but Rakhmonov was obviously the one in the driver's seat for the most point. And then Garry got a short notice main event opportunity back in April, I believe it was, when he went up against Carlos Prates. And he did a great job in terms of putting on a good mixed martial arts performance for the first 3 rounds. Won those rounds on all 3 judges' scorecards. And he started to slow down in those 4th and 5th rounds. That's where Prates had most of his success. But luckily, Garry was able to hold on long enough to see the scorecards and get his hand raised by that. He's a very slick striker, and that's mainly what we saw from him in the first half of his UFC career when he made his debut, picking opponents apart, knocking out a few of those guys as well. But it wasn't until he fought Michael Venom Page that we saw him really start to go to his grappling, which, if you watched him in his Cage Warriors days, that's an approach that he had in his bag, but it seemed like he was kind of keeping that closer to his vest and forcing guys to just strike with him. And then he surprised a lot of people with the way that he was able to out-grapple Michael Venom Page. Garry, I still think is very talented. May not be the most fan favorite fighter out there. I think he's a guy that a lot of people like to hate on, but he is very skilled, very, very talented, and still only 28 years old. So I think we'll see Garry nullify most of Muhammad's striking. I think we'll see, striking and pressure. I think he'll be able to counter him effectively. I think he'll stick and move well. I think he'll stuff most of the takedowns coming early from Belal. And I think we'll see Garry just land more damage through those first 2 rounds. And I wouldn't even be surprised to see Garry to try to look to grapple as well. But I think that would drain his gas tank a little bit quicker. And that type of style of fight would definitely favor a guy like Belal. But I like Garry here. I think he'll do a good enough job in terms of getting off on enough damage. Say what you want about him. I think he has high fight IQ, and I think he knows the perfect way of beating Belal here. And I think it was a very concerted effort for him to ensure that this was only a 3-round fight. So I'm going to go Garry here. I'm going to go Garry by decision. I'd like to see what the KO prop is because that could absolutely be on the board. Maybe he clips and counters Belal enough here that he can land that big shot to put him away. But my official prediction will be Garry and Garry by decision. But I'm going to wait this line out. I feel like we might be able to get a better line as there could potentially be some Belal Muhammad love coming in later on in fight week. So I'll sit still and then look to see how I want to approach the Garry action closer to fight time. All right, that brings us to our lightweight main event now, as we have Arman Tsarukyan coming in at -500, going up against Dan the Hangman Hooker, who comes in at +375. Very unfortunate turn of events for Arman Tsarukyan, who was supposed to start the year off by challenging Islam Makhachev for the title. Unfortunately, while cutting weight, his back gave out on him, and he could not cut the weight, nor could he just, he couldn't risk the chance of going out there not with his facilities against a high-level guy like Makhachev. Hence, he was forced to pull out. We all know the story from there. Makhachev ended up fighting Renato Moicano, finished him in the first round, and Tsarukyan's been on the sidelines ever since. The last time we actually saw Tsarukyan in action was UFC 300 back in April of 2024, and that night he had a pretty close fight against former champion Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Oliveira had him in a tight choke, especially in that first round, but Tsarukyan was able to work through it, and eventually Tsarukyan just got back to his rinse and repeat grappling style, one of the best in the lightweight division in terms of implementing that. And then we know his striking is leveling up at a decent rate, where he's been able to knock out the likes of Joaquim Silva and Benio Dariush. before Dariush was really seen as a guy with big durability issues. But Tsarukyan, I still think, is a guy that could end up fighting for the title, a guy that could potentially be champion given the route that he's able to take. But he's going to have to get the UFC back on his good side. And I think a large part of that would have to be with him having a dominant and highlight reel type performance here against Dan Hooker. But just wrapping it up on Tsarukyan here, great wrestling, great chain wrestler, great smothering grappling, great cardio, high-level fighter all around. And I really think he's in his prime now. Now, he's going up against Dan Hooker, who it really seemed like things were coming to an end for him, and he probably would have been released by the promotion. He went 1-4 from 2020 to 2022, but has managed to really turn things around after going back up to the lightweight division, where he was able to pull off an upset, which I still can't believe. He was an underdog to Claudio Poyes. He was able to batter him and finish him in the second round with a body shot. Then he pulled off 2 straight split decision victories over Jalen Turner and Mateusz Gamrot. I thought the Gamrot fight was pretty clear that he deserved to win, even the Turner fight, but more so the Gamrot fight because he was able to land more damage. He defended the takedowns well enough that Gamrot really couldn't get off on much damage when he was able to get that top position. And then Hooker did such a good job in terms of working back to the cage, working to his feet, and then letting go with his damage where he clearly had an advantage over Gamrot. He's 35 years old, taken a lot of damage through his 36-fight career. His durability is a little bit of a question mark that I don't think his last 3 opponents could totally take advantage of. Turner had some decent success, but a guy that, is really front-loaded with his success if he's able to get wins, and Hooker was able to battle through that. Nasty striker, great combinations, long and lanky for the division as well. Starting at 6 foot, 75-inch reach. One of the more entertaining and fan-friendly fighters out there. But this is a very tough fight for him to try to crack the puzzle. Sure, people could say it might look like the Gamrot fight where Tsarukyan is wrestling for his life and Hooker is able to out-damage him and eventually beat him by decision that way. But I think we're going to see a very pissed-off Tsarukyan here. Knowing that he should be fighting for the title instead of Paddy, which I believe is the direction that the UFC is going in, I think he's going to want to go out there and try to make a statement. I think he's going to try to land some big shots on Hooker. I think he is fast enough and powerful enough to crash that pocket and land his power before Hooker is able to make and pay for it. And then if he can't get off on that, I think he can get to his wrestling enough. And I think Hooker will struggle to get back to his feet as quickly as he did against Gamrot. But I think it's just a matter of time before Tsarukyan continues to just land those damage spots, make each round look pretty much in his favor. And I've kind of been battling between Tsarukyan by decision and Tsarukyan by knockout. I think my final prediction will end up being Tsarukyan by decision, but I would not at all count out a possible knockout victory either for Tsarukyan. But I think Tsarukyan wins. I think he wins at a pretty decent clip. Minus 500 might be a little bit of a stretch. I wouldn't be surprised to see some Hooker love come in during the end of the week, so I might just sit back and see how this one turns out. But I like Tsarukyan here. I think he is the best lightweight, maybe outside of Ilia Topuria right now. And I think he'll showcase that once again by getting this win here over Dan Hooker. And like I said, low confidence, but I'm going to say Tsarukyan by decision. And I meant low confidence in the method of victory. I have a pretty solid confidence that Tsarukyan is going to win. It's just the method of victory that I'm a little bit shaky about. All right. There you guys go. UFC Qatar broken down in total for you guys. 14 fights there. Again, no live streams this week, no extra content. The only other videos I'll be dropping at the ending of the week is going to be for the Cage Warriors cards and the LFA card for the Legacy Warriors podcast. I will drop Thursday, Friday. Quick picks as well. I'm not even going to spend too much time on them. No graphics, nothing. I'm just going to whip it up for you guys as quickly as possible. I'll be out of town until Saturday afternoon. And yeah, that's a wrap. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. Make sure you guys check out the MMALOTN Patreon page, as I'll have all my track plays and written breakdowns up there for you guys. And I'll see you guys later this week for the Legacy Warriors podcast. See you guys then. Peace.
Last thing.